The Earth is full of wonders, but some landforms defy explanation, from strange formations carved by unknown forces to landscapes that seem almost otherworldly. Here are 15 of the most mysterious landforms ever discovered. Number 15. Kaindy Lake in Kazakhstan. Kaindy Lake, or Kaindy Lake, which is in the Tian Shan Mountains of southeastern Kazakhstan, was only formed relatively recently, after a massive limestone landslide in 1911. To create a 1,300-foot or 400-meter-deep lake, the result today is an underwater wonder that feels almost otherworldly, especially as after more than a century the trees have not been fully decayed. Adding to this effect is the way that the nutrients in tree trunks have actually encouraged the growth of algae and other underwater plants. So really, beneath the surface, the forest is getting bigger and greener. It has become a truly bizarre place to visit, and to begin with, you have to travel to the middle of nowhere in the mountain range, far from any city and to an altitude of over 6,000 feet. Once you get there, you'll find that the lake has what seems like an unnaturally vivid blue or green color, which changes because of the varying mineral contents in it. And then you'll begin to notice the forest through the clear water. This clarity allows you to see far beneath the surface and see the submerged trees in incredible detail. It's a place where nature has created something entirely unique. Thanks to its location and a random set of events, it's something unlike anything else you'll see on Earth. Number 14. The Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming. Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming is undoubtedly one of the most iconic and mysterious natural formations in all of the United States. Standing above the plains of northeastern Wyoming, it reaches a height of 867 feet or 264 meters, and strangely is unlike anything else in the region. It's been an important place for so long that in September of 1906, President Roosevelt made it the first United States national monument, which has protected it from human interference and damage ever since. The name Devil's Tower was given to it during an expedition in 1875, after apparently mistakenly translating a local name to mean that, but the people who had lived in the region for far longer have known it by various other names, such as Bear's House or Tree Rock or even Brown Buffalo Horn. Quite how it was formed remains a mystery, as while scientists do have theories, no one can definitively explain it. The most widely accepted explanation is that Devil's Tower is what's left of an ancient volcanic intrusion, which is where a core of magma solidified underground and was then exposed as the surrounding softer rock was eroded. There are some problems with that theory though, mainly as there's no evidence of volcanic activity around the tower itself, so that's pretty strange that such a massive structure could have formed in the middle of a relatively flat landscape. One of the most visually unusual aspects of the tower is its unique jointing. The tower's sides are made up of hundreds of long hexagonal columns of rock, which appear to have been perfectly chiseled. Well, it is though a natural phenomenon which is understood scientifically, but it still looks and feels deliberate, as if the tower were a structure designed by ancient beings. The Lakota Sioux, for example, tell the story of a group of girls who were chased by a giant bear, and to escape this, the girls prayed to the Great Spirit who caused the ground beneath them to rise into the sky, lifting them out of reach. The bear, in its rage, clawed at the sides of the newly formed tower, leaving behind the deep vertical grooves that are visible today. In the absence of any scientific explanation, who's to say that that one isn't rooted in the real truth? Number 13. Socotra in Yemen. Covering an area of about 1,400 square miles or 3,700 square kilometers, Socotra is an island archipelago that's just off the coast of Yemen in the Arabian Sea. There are 4 main islands, the largest of which is also called Socotra, and they're known for their bizarre landscapes and unique biodiversity. This is because they've been isolated from the mainland for many millions of years, which has allowed evolution to have a chance to go in different directions than anywhere else on Earth, leading to the formation of rather mysterious places. To begin with, the vegetation is unlike anything else you'll see. Its most famous plant, for example, is the dragon's blood tree, which has an umbrella-shaped canopy and thick branches, with a blood-red resin that's believed to have medicinal and magical properties. Local folklore says that the dragon's blood tree is connected to ancient rituals, and that the island landscape was once home to giants who planted them. Another plant that's unique to Socotra is the desert rose, which is a thick-stemmed tree with bulbous roots and pink flowers that makes the most of the island's arid climate. Its swollen trunk stores water and then shrinks again as this water is used before it's able to replenish. Most of Socotra's 825 plant species, over a third of which are found nowhere else on Earth, have shapes and features like these that seem more suited to a different planet than our own. Animal life too is kind of unusual on Socotra, and while there aren't any large mammals or dangerous predators, there are a wide variety of unique birds, reptiles, and invertebrates. The Socotra sunbird stands out as a brilliantly colored bird that's found only on the island, as is the Socotra cormorant, which is a distinctly different subspecies. There's also several species of geckos, skinks, and spiders that are found nowhere else, all making this feel truly like a special place. Number 12. The Giants Causeway in Ireland. No trip to the coastline of County Antrim in Northern Ireland is complete without a visit to the Giants Causeway, which is one of the most mysterious-looking natural formations. Featuring around 40,000 interlocking basalt columns that seem too geometric and perfectly positioned to have been shaped purely by nature, these columns, most of which are hexagonal, form a massive stepped causeway that leads out into the North Atlantic. To make things even stranger, different lighting conditions can make the columns appear to change color, beginning as a deep gray and black to reddish and golden colors during sunset. These precise shapes seem almost too perfect, but they are in fact the result of volcanic activity that took place around 50 million years ago. Even though geologists can't explain the process behind the formation, the scale and perfection of this causeway make it feel very different from other natural phenomena, and it's no surprise that there have been plenty of other explanations over the years. That's because according to Irish legend, it was built by a giant named Finn MacCool as a bridge to Scotland so he could confront his rival, the Scottish giant Benidorm. In this version of the tale, when Finn saw how enormous Benidorm was, he fled back to Ireland, but not before his wife disguised him as a baby. When Benidorm saw the size of the baby, he assumed that the father must be a truly colossal giant and retreated to Scotland, tearing up the causeway behind him to prevent Finn from following. It is a myth that has become so deeply important in Irish culture that it's become forever linked with the site itself and a huge part of the local identity and history. Number 11. Mount Roraima in South America. Mount Roraima is an incredibly flat-topped mountain that marks the borders of Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana. Reaching a height of 9,219 feet or 2,810 meters above the surrounding jungle, this Table Mountain, or Tepui, is a part of the ancient Guiana Shield, which is one of the Earth's oldest geological formations. The result of this is that the plateau on top, which covers an area of around 12 square miles or about 31 square kilometers, has been cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. The mountain's summit is a strange place with large carnivorous plants such as the Roraima pitcher plant and peculiar endemic frogs that thrive in these cloud forests. It is uniquely cut off from everywhere else, with the cliffs that surround the mountain rising vertically for hundreds of feet, making it seem like a fortress in the sky. Its flat summit is covered with strange rock formations which have formed over millennia by wind and rain that take on a bizarre, almost unbelievable shape. Some of these formations even look like ancient ruins or statues, leading early explorers to believe that they were looking at the remains of a long-forgotten civilization. For local communities, though, particularly the Pemon and Capon tribes, Mount Roraima is a deeply sacred place. Their legends tell of the mountain as the stump of a giant tree that once held all the fruits and vegetables in the world. They believe that the tree was, though, cut down by one of their ancestors, which caused a great flood and left Mount Roraima behind as the only place to survive. Number 10. Deadfly, Namibia. Deadfly, which is in Namibia's Namib-Naukluft National Park, is surely one of the most mysterious landscapes in the world. As part of the Namib Desert, Deadfly is actually an ancient clay pan with a name that means dead marsh in reference to the barren, lifeless feel of the area. Across this odd landscape, the thing that you'll notice first are the dead camel thorn trees, which are thought to be around 900 years old. These skeletal trees, which have been charred by the unforgiving desert sun, have not decomposed because the climate here is simply too dry for microorganisms to begin the process of decay. These trees, which have been preserved in a state of strange stillness, give the deadfly an unsettling atmosphere. It hasn't always been like this, though. The area was once an oasis that was fed by the Schaub River, which, depending on rainfall elsewhere, would occasionally flow through the desert and allow the camelthorn trees to grow. Over time, however, the sand dunes in the desert shifted and eventually cut off the flow of the river, which then left the area without any water. The trees died, but because it was so arid now, they were never able to decompose, and deadfly turned into the ghostly landscape that it is today. It has such a mysterious atmosphere with the dry, cracked white clay pan and the sand dunes around it. The dunes themselves are some of the highest in the world, with some reaching up to almost 1,000 feet or 300 meters high. The bold color comes from the high iron content that's in the sand that's oxidized over millions of years, creating a unique and mysterious landscape. Number 9. The Mori Boulders in New Zealand. The Mori Boulders, which can be found on Koe Koe Beach along the Otago coast of New Zealand's South Island, is one of the most unusual natural wonders in a country known for its stunning environments. They're a series of large, spherical boulders, some of which measure 6.5 feet wide or 2 meters in diameter, and are scattered across the beach, and their smooth, almost perfectly round shapes have long been a mystery. Even though science has now been able to give an explanation for their formation, there is still something mystical about this site, and it remains hugely important to local beliefs. In geological terms, they're what's known as a septarian concretion, which were formed around 60 million years ago. The boulders began forming on the ocean floor when minerals such as calcite slowly began to accumulate around a central core, in a similar way to how pearls form inside of an oyster. Over millions of years, further layers compressed those formations and resulted in the round, stone-like structures we see. But despite there being this explanation, there's no doubt that the Mori boulders look like they've been purposefully put there because of their size and near-perfect spherical shape. While similar boulders can be found in a few places around the world, such as on the shores of North America and Costa Rica, the Mori boulders are unique because of how large and similar to one another that they are. Some boulders have even naturally cracked over time and have revealed intricate honeycomb-like patterns inside. These internal structures are known as the septaria and are actually formed of mineral deposits that have crystallized in geometric patterns. But according to local Maori legend, the boulders are the remains of calabashes, eel baskets, and gourds that were washed ashore after the Araite Uru, which was a great ancestral canoe, was shipwrecked along the coast. With the nearby cliffs believed to represent the petrified remains of the wrecked canoe, well, for some, then, the boulders have a great spiritual significance, as they're all that's left of a great journey and a connection to ancestors. However impressive the boulders may be from a scientific perspective, it's that spiritual link that makes them truly important, and it ensures that they keep their air of mystery. Number 8. Vulcan Point in the Philippines. While every geological formation in the world is unique in its own way, there are very few of them that are completely unlike any other. But Vulcan Point is definitely one of them. Found within the Taal volcano in the Philippines, it's long been a place that's interesting to scientists and those wanting to visit special places. That's because Vulcan Point is a volcanic island in a lake, which itself is on an island in a lake, which is also on an island. Surprisingly, there are a handful of other places on Earth that can claim the same thing, but Vulcan's Point volcanic origins, along with the fact that its host volcano is still very much active, is what ultimately makes it stand out. Taal volcano is one of the most active volcanoes in the Philippines, and its complex system is what led to the development of this unusual landform. Vulcan Point is close to the western shore of Crater Lake, which is the lake that fills the main crater of the Taal volcano. Now, this volcano itself sits within the much larger Taal Lake, which fills a massive caldera that was formed by an enormous prehistoric volcanic eruption. Taal Lake is a major geological feature of the landscape of Luzon Island, which is the largest and northernmost island in the Philippine archipelago. But despite all the volcanic activity, Vulcan Point has managed to remain intact, something that's further added to its mystery. The most recent example of this took place in 2020 when at time the island was covered in vegetation. In January of that year, there was a massive eruption that sent ash as far as Metro Manila. At first, it was assumed that Vulcan Point was completely destroyed, but once things had settled, it was still there. That was despite the fact that all the vegetation had burned away and all of the water in the surrounding lake had drained away through cracks in the volcano. This water has though since returned, and so too has the vegetation, and soon it'll seem as if the eruption never took place. Culturally, Taal volcano and the surrounding areas, including Vulcan Point, have then become integral part of local lore and mythology. For centuries, the Taal region has been revered and feared by the local communities, with stories of spirits and deities that are connected to the volcano and the lake. Some locals view the volcano as a living entity, with Vulcan Point and the surrounding islands being integral parts of the larger, mystical body of Taal, adding further cultural reverence to the mystery surrounding Vulcan Point. Moving on to number 7, the Mount Erebus Ice Towers in Antarctica. Antarctica is, of course, the most inhospitable and difficult to explore continent on the planet because of the freezing temperatures, ice sheets, and unpredictable weather patterns, and the more we learn of it, the more mysterious and incredible it seems to be. With bizarre structures found all over the place, one of the most mysterious are the ice towers of Mount Erebus, which is the southernmost active volcano on Earth. These structures are near the summit of this volcano and almost seem like they're guarding one of the most remote environments of all. Mount Erebus itself is located on Ross Island and has been continuously active for decades, with a continuous lava lake bubbling from within the crater. This geothermal activity is what led to the formation of the ice towers, which are essentially giant, hollow chimneys of ice that vent steam from the volcano's internal geothermal system. These towers develop when hot volcanic gases escape through cracks in the ice and snow that cover the upper slopes of Erebus. And as the steam rises and cools in the cold Antarctic air, it freezes and gradually builds up, forming tall spires that can reach heights of up to 60 feet or 18 meters. On a continent that's so associated with freezing temperatures and mostly lifeless, these ice towers are alive with activity beneath their frozen exteriors. They continually release steam and new ice is added as the steam cools and freezes. These towers also seem pretty otherworldly, with pristine white ice against the dark rocky surface of Mount Erebus, and their hollow interiors glow with a strange blue light that's the result of sunlight filtering through the thick ice. Early studies on Mount Erebus have found the existence of extremophiles in the cracks and crevices, and they could well pave the journey to discovering life elsewhere in our solar system, like on Mars or the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. In such a remote place, and as an active volcanic environment, which means it's dangerous even trying to get close to the mountain, researchers who have been able to visit the towers say that there's an almost surreal atmosphere where the combination of freezing temperatures, volcanic heat, and the silent presence of the towers creates a sense of being in a place unlike anywhere else. Number 6. Hordor Geothermal Field in Iceland. So I'm never going to pronounce this name correctly, but the Hordor Geothermal Field in Iceland is one of the most mysterious landscapes in the country, where the raw power of the Earth is fully on display. It's part of the larger Golden Circle route, and it's a geothermal area that's home to some of Iceland's most famous hot springs and geysers, including Storkur, which erupts with clockwork regularly every few minutes, shooting boiling water high into the sky. In many ways, this is the spiritual home of geothermal activity, with the most fascinating aspect being the strange nature of the geysers themselves. The field is home to several of them, with the most famous being Geysir, which is the one that all other geysers from around the world would get their name from. Although Geysir itself is now largely dormant today, it used to erupt with spectacular force, sending boiling water 230 feet into the air. Its behavior, though, is completely erratic, having gone through periods of dormancy and then sudden powerful awakenings. In fact, earthquakes in the region are known to trigger Geysir's eruptions, but predicting when or why such activity will happen remains impossible, showing just how much there's still to learn about this area. The bubbling mud pools and steam vents scattered across this area further add to creating an alien-looking landscape, and the boiling sulfur-rich mud constantly churns, creating a strange gurgling noise that seems to come from deep within the earth. Well, despite all the scientific understanding, though, the intensity and power of these geysers and the unpredictable nature of the geothermal field itself make it feel as though something else is at work too, and there's much more to reveal about what's happening beneath the surface. This site also holds a deep cultural and spiritual significance for the Icelandic people, who have long seen their island as a land shaped by powerful natural forces. The geothermal fields are often associated with stories of the hidden folk, or elves, who are believed to live in the rocks and hills, so perhaps it's them who can finally help to uncover its secrets. Number 5. The Dansha Landform in China. Covering such a huge area, China has some of the most beautiful and varied landscapes of all, from mountain ranges to vast deserts, but by far the most mysterious and spectacular is the Dansha Landform. Found mainly in the provinces of Gansu, Guizhou, and Hunan, it's a region that's known for its vividly colored rock formations, in particular a series of red sandstone cliffs that ripple across the environment like waves of fire. The most famous examples of this landform can be seen in a national geologic park in Gansu province, where the hills are painted in shades of red, orange, yellow, and green, which have led to them being known as the Rainbow Mountains. Various minerals in the rock, like the iron oxide, are what give the formations their brilliant colors, which seem to further change depending on the time of day and weather. But while this basic method of formation is known, it doesn't really explain everything though, and the precise conditions that led to such intense coloration in specific areas still remains poorly understood. The landform's strange shapes, from the towering peaks to the narrow ridges and deep gorges, are unlike anything else, so there must have been something rare and unusual taking place there to make it all possible. Temples and shrines were often built into the cliffs here, and this has established the formation as somewhere that's connected to the divine realm. The large formations, which are in some way said to resemble castles, animals, or human figures, have directly inspired stories of the gods and mythical creatures. Historically, though, it's been difficult to explore, as many of these areas were remote and pretty tricky to reach. Isolated by rough terrain and deep valleys, it's something that helped preserve the natural beauty of the landscape, and as with it out of reach, it felt even more mysterious. It's only been in recent years, though, with improved transportation and tourism infrastructure, that more people have been able to see the landform for themselves. And to see how large it is, with the constantly changing colors, and on misty days, the seemingly floating islands in the clouds, makes you feel like you've been transported to somewhere truly special. Number 4. Mount Thor in Canada. Mount Thor, which is on Baffin Island in Nunavut, Canada, is part of an Inuiatuk National Park. Known for its sheer granite cliffs and Arctic terrain, it truly is a record-breaking mountain, because this is where you'll find the world's greatest vertical drop, with a nearly 4,100-foot or 1,250-meter vertical cliff face. There's something quite humbling about the thought of standing up against it. The mountain itself reaches an altitude of about 5,495 feet, or about 1,675 meters, and while this is a little less than 1/5 of the height of Mount Everest, Mount Thor is unusual in that it has one cliff that rises directly above the valley floor beneath. Its sheer, perfectly smooth western face actually drops at a 105-degree angle, so it overhangs slightly, making it almost seem as if it's gravity-defying. Well, adding further to the allure of Mount Thor is its remote location. It's high in the Arctic. The mountain is surrounded by a vast, icy wilderness that's largely untouched. The region experiences extreme weather conditions with temperatures that can plunge far below freezing even during the summer months. The isolation and the brutal climate here make Mount Thor a difficult place to reach, let alone explore. For climbers, Mount Thor, despite not being as high as the world's most famous peaks, is a huge challenge. The mountain's near vertical face combined with the Arctic weather makes it one of the most difficult climbs in the world. Since the first successful attempt in 1985, only a handful of climbers have managed to take it on, and even fewer have been able to do so without facing significant obstacles along the way. The difficulty of the climb, along with the risk and unpredictability of the Arctic environment, adds to the sense that Mount Thor is more than just an ordinary mountain, but it's a true test of human endurance. Number 3. The 12 Apostles in Australia. The 12 Apostles, they're a series of limestone stacks that seem to rise out of the Southern Ocean along Australia's Great Ocean Road. And even though they're one of the country's most recognizable landmarks, there's a sense of mystery around them, both in how they were formed and in the way that they're constantly changing. The towering rock stacks, some of which reach as high as 164 feet or 50 meters, were not always isolated structures in the ocean. Over time, though, the continual power of the ocean waves and the prevailing winds carved away the softer limestone rock, creating caves, then arches, and finally leaving behind these freestanding columns. Surprisingly, even though they're called the 12 Apostles, there were never actually 12 stacks, and originally there were just 9. Today, though, only 8 of them remain standing after one collapsed in the sea in 2005. This constant erosion, which continues to eat away at the stack, shows that these formations are just temporary in the grand scheme of things. The idea that these massive, seemingly permanent structures won't be there forever, or even for much longer, adds a layer of mystery to them, especially as from a human perspective, they seem so strong and stable. Another reason why they've become such a famous landmark is that depending on when they're viewed, the limestone stacks can take on a very different look. At sunrise and sunset, they glow in soft shades of orange and gold, while on stormy days, the ocean crashes violently against the base of the pillars, covering them in mist and spray, and transforming the normally peaceful landscape into a powerful and dangerous place. Number 2. Isla Bermeja in Mexico. Thanks to modern technology, we now have incredibly detailed maps of the entire planet's surface. But before satellites were introduced, cartographers relied on their experienced sailors and explorers to know where the land masses were and their shape. This did often lead to small errors, or even the belief that entire islands existed where they didn't. And there's one that, to this day, remains a complete mystery as to whether it was ever there or not. Known as Isla Bermeja, it was a small island off the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico that for centuries was shown on maps, and its existence wasn't in doubt at all. In recent times, though, expeditions have been unable to find any trace of it, making it one of the biggest mysteries in cartography in the Gulf of Mexico. The island was first mentioned in Spanish maps dating back to the 16th century. Described as a small, reddish island, it was said to be around 100 nautical miles off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. It was only in the late 20th century, as Mexico and the United States negotiated maritime boundaries in the Gulf, that it became politically important, though because according to international maritime law, the island's existence would have major impact on the boundary line between each country's exclusive economic zones, particularly in the oil-rich region known as the Donut Hole. Mexico's territorial claims over a larger section of this hugely valuable area depended heavily on that island being real. In an attempt to prove its existence, expeditions were sent out in the 1990s, but couldn't find any trace of it. Despite using modern mapping techniques, satellite imagery, and sonar, researchers could find no trace of this Isla Bermeja where it was supposed to be, either above or below the waves. One of the more plausible theories is that this island may have eroded over time or sunk due to natural processes such as rising sea levels. But even if this was the case, you'd expect there still to be a shallow mound beneath the water, and so far no one's been able to find it. It's also quite possible that it was a ghost island, or one that explorers mistakenly thought was there, but was actually somewhere completely different. This wasn't unheard of in the early days of mapmaking, as most maps would use earlier versions as a source. Mistakes like these could continue for centuries before anyone ever noticed. Of course, while the solution to this mystery is most likely one of those suggestions, the absence of any certainty has led to some wild ideas too. Some claim, for example, that it was deliberately destroyed by the United States to undermine Mexico's territorial claims. There is, of course, no actual evidence to back that up, but it shows just how invested some people are in this particular mystery, and how far they'll go to use it to claim a much larger conspiracy. Number 1. Mount Kailash in Tibet. The early 20th century was when explorers turned their attention to the highest peaks on Earth, and with new technologies they were finally able to reach the summit of famous mountains like Everest, K2, and many more. There are, though, still some that have never been climbed, even though they aren't as tall, and of these, the most mysterious is Mount Kailash. Located in the remote western region of Tibet, it is one of the most sacred mountains in the world and holds an important place in a number of religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Bon, which sees it at the center of the spiritual universe. Reaching a height of 21,000 feet or 6,600 meters above sea level, it's not as tall as many others in the Himalayas, but its unique pyramid shape and its location have made it one of the most special. It's thought that the reason why this mountain in particular was seen as so spiritually significant is the unusual geography around it, whereby two of Asia's most important rivers, the Indus and the Brahmaputra, originate close by, as do the Sutlej and the Karnali, a tributary of the Ganges. This concentration of sacred water sources in the region has led many to see Kailash as the navel of the world, which provides life force to the vast lands around it. The reason why no one has ever climbed the peak is not because it's regarded as particularly difficult or to do so in comparison to any other, but in respect of how revered of a place it is. The Chinese government has expressly forbidden anyone to attempt to climb it, and you certainly won't find any tour guides willing to help you. While outsiders may have a curiosity about conquering the mountain, locals are highly protective of it, and for good reason. Within the legends of Mount Kailash, it's believed that even attempting to climb it would bring disastrous consequences, and that as a place for deities, the summit is simply somewhere that was not designed for humans to set foot on. Perhaps one day that will all change, but until then, it will remain one of the most mysterious mountains of all. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.